Yep, we have gotten to part 3 of this sample TOK presentation breakdown. So in part 1, we looked at some of the requirements and beginning with your real life situation, choosing and beginning with the real life situation. In part 2, we broke that real life situation down, and we looked at knowledge questions and developing knowledge questions. And now in part 3, we are going to be looking at the TOK tools, developing those TOK tools so that you wind up with a lovely, lovely TOK presentation. And then we go back to my handy dandy little diagram. And so I'm going to develop these arguments, and I'm going to use some of the TOK tools to do that. And then I'm going to apply it back to the real life situation, right? So I can, you definitely need to bring some other real life situations in there. And the following slide will present some potential ideas. Alrighty, so we've come up with a knowledge question. We've explored the knowledge question a little bit and come up with some arguments. And now I'm going to take those arguments and develop with my TOK tools, yo. Okay. Here we go. So my argument is that emotion blinds us to reasoned arguments and makes us irrational. Okay. So basically, what I'm going to do here is explain using some of the TOK knowledge. Is that the TOK knowledge, the theory of knowledge, the stuff that we've spoken about. So emotions support already held beliefs. So how am my argument is that emotion blinds us to reasoned arguments and makes us irrational. And the reason why emotion does this is because it helps support already held beliefs. That is one of the things that we said in the TOK textbook is that emotions are not just about what you feel. What you feel is colored by what you already know. And this is the stuff that is based on our culture, our religion, our personal experiences. So we know something is wrong, like how we know something is filtered through our religion, right? And that then provides us our lens to be able to examine other stuff. All right, we talked about the possibility of personal experiences. So I'm going to give a personal experience here in terms of this. And then I'm going to refer it back to the original real life situation, right? So in looking at this, in some ways that what we have here is the reason why people were willing to believe this without really looking further into the mechanics of the study is because it supports what I already know as being true, what I already believe, right? So one of the things that's happening in terms of this real life situation is we have these culture wars about rights for people who are gay and whether or not religion should play a role and so on and so forth, right? A little bit more explanation in your thing. And then for myself, now I don't remember when this study came out. I didn't read it. And possibly the reason why I didn't read it is because, well, one, I can't read everything that's on the interwebs, but maybe I saw this in passing in one of the things that I read, but it sounded fine to me. It sounded true. Of course, it makes sense that exposure to people who are gay would help bring down people's discrimination against gays, right? Because in my personal experience, this is true in that I was raised religiously, and I wouldn't say my family is very discriminatory toward gays, but at the same time, it's not something that I think anyone has back then a really positive thing with, right? But for me, in high school, I had a number of friends who were gay, and they had a lot of issues, right? And so I would spend time with them, and I would know what their problems were and how it related to their being gay. And they were good friends of mine. And because I knew them and knew the struggles that they were having, then it felt like I couldn't be a good person, and still discriminate against people and kind of make people have those, be part of what forces people to have those really negative experiences. So for me, because of my personal experience and kind of the emotion that is still, like, being a good person and being a good friend, and feeling empathy for my friends as they had like suicidal thoughts, or just really, crying and these really horrible situations, then of course this makes sense, because that's essentially what happened to me, right? So there we go. I've incorporated, I've explained my argument, I've connected it back to the real life situation, and I've connected it to a personal experience that helps support my argument. Okay, which brings us to, I can then also counter this by saying that there are problems with intuition, right? And some of those problems involve basically this really big bias. Because it's coming from me, I would place more faith in my intuition and my emotion than maybe somebody else's, right? So you can get further information about this from our textbook. But there you should see I've done all of these things for this one argument. I'm not going to go into as much depth for the counter arguments and stuff. But that one should give you a bit of an idea of what I'm kind of looking for, right? Okay, which brings us to a counter argument, is that it's not so much that emotion blinds us to evidence, but that the evidence exists to support. So it's these two things together. So it's not emotion which has blinded us, but that basically what we already know and experience is now justified. Our emotions are justified because there is this scientific process, right? So the scientific process actually justifies our emotion and therefore our knowledge, not the other way around, right? Because part of the way that we look at science is that it is, we tend to use the word proof, like science proves things. And science is objective because it uses a scientific method. And there's this extra step of objectivity to it because there's this peer review process. So experts say that this information is good. And so because this information is being agreed upon and accepted by all of these experts, Science Magazine is one of the foremost science magazines and science journals, academic journals in the world. So all of these other scientists have read this data and given its approval. So therefore, how can I not approve it, considering that I myself am not a scientist? So I can, again, refer it back to the real life situation. I can refer to myself, how you guys all know I do this all the time because I'm like, there's a study that says blah, 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 blah. That we rely on science as being the expert and then base our understanding on this expert knowledge, when in this case that science may be faulty, and that's exactly, and science is not infallible in and of itself. Okay, that was a bit short, but you can do this. So I've included personal experience in there, real life situation. I've included an area of knowledge, science. You do not need to include an area of knowledge, but if you can and you can push yourself in there, that's awesome. So I talked about science and the way knowledge is added to science as a shared. So scientific knowledge is the shared knowledge that I'm bringing in there. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Which brings us to the next. That emotion is a trustworthy way to make decisions, given that most of us don't understand that science and math involved in information like this. So basically, we all know that math is magic. Math is absolutely magic. Once you get past, like, I don't know, fingers and toes, who knows what's going on, right? So our own reactions to this information is all we really have. So our knowledge is based on emotion, and it's necessary that it's based on emotion because we live in an increasingly complex world and an increasingly magical world, right? of information that we as like Stone Age apes are in no way able to really handle with our brains that are not developed for today. All right. So there's some stuff in there. You can go to the textbook and look up educated intuition and stuff like that. All right. The other thing that I would consider you do is at the end of every chapter I gave you, there's a little diagram with the way of knowing in the middle and additional questions in it. So, for example, in looking at the way of knowing for emotion, natural sciences, what does biology tell us about the emotions? What role does empathy play in the historian's work, et cetera, et cetera. So these are some extra questions that you can use to help you push forward. All right. And so what I'm saying here is that my argument here is that emotion-based knowledge provides a method of navigation in this very, very complex world. And I refer back to the real life situation. One of the things in this real life situation is we're trying to, governments are trying to develop policies that deal with the situation, that provide rights for the greatest number of people. And despite the issues that they may have been with this study, right? Who of us understands really complex statistics? I remember reading a study myself that basically said, so here I'm incorporating my own personal experience in it. When I was doing statistical methods in the social sciences, believe it or not, like statistics was like the higher level math I really kind of got. Calculus, magic, statistics kind of makes sense. And so that a lot of the people who are using complex statistics don't really even understand it. So for example, the dude who wrote this study is he was getting his PhD in statistics. So he knows how to manipulate statistics. A lot more than the vast majority of people who are actually reading his study and looking through his information. It took another statistics dudes to kind of really explore it and bring it down. All right. So there we go. All right. So here we have my handy dandy diagram again. And so you can see how all of these things have been filled in, and you too can do the same. You too are magic. Do you believe in magic? I do, and it's called math. Don't tell Miss Hamid I said that. So basically, this is it. I know I fooled you. I told you there was a third one. I think I made this long enough for a third one. And if you have any questions, hit me up. With an email. Don't hit me upside the head because that will hurt and not be nice. And try to see if you can basically kind of do something similar with yours. You want to have your personal experiences in there. You want to try to include some shared knowledge if you can. So personal knowledge, shared knowledge. Come up with different ways of looking at your question. And lastly, reach a conclusion, right? So what I would say at this point is, yes, emotion plays a strong role in justifying our knowledge because, we're math deficient and knowledge in today's world relies on math, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I can consider the implications for other fields, right? So if we are using our emotions to make these complex decisions, what does that mean for things like education, for example, right? Because we're deciding what to teach, how to teach things based on these studies. What does that mean for anything that deals with social science and statistics? And what does that mean if our public policy is vulnerable to cray-cray people making cray-cray information up? I don't know. But that's part of what you do in your summation, in your conclusion. And I'm ending this right before 30 minutes. I hope you enjoyed my presentation kind of thing. Not really. Bye, y'all.